different than any kind of Sunday school class I've ever taught, or lesson or series of lessons that I've ever taught, because as I've told you almost every time, it's not really a Bible study series, it's more of a worldview series. And yet I think it's important to come from time to time and take care of these kind of things, because we do live in the world, don't we? And when we live in the world, we interact with others in the world who have different ideas. And I think it's so important to come to some foundational ideas about how the world works. And there's really only several areas that if you have these foundational convictions of how the world works, then you're able to almost interact with just about any kind of conversation that goes on. And I used to see years ago, I would watch these commentators on the news, and I would think, how are they able to respond to these things so quick? How do they know all this whatnot? And now I have been a commentator more often on the radio than on television because I have a face for radio. But I understand now how it's done, in that for one, you're already kind of an expert on the subject when they call. I've never been interviewed on a cooking class or anything like this. It's always something I already somewhat know about. But then the second, even if they hit you with something you don't know, it's an area in which you have some fundamental values. And those fundamental values you build everything off of. And so even if you don't know the details and the circumstances, you're able to respond in such a way that keeps you within the boundaries. So the whole idea of this series of classes is to give us some of those fundamental ideas, so that even though we might not know, for example, all the details of a particular government spending program, we're able to have an opinion on the government spending program, because we have a value or a worldview. And the spending program either goes with or goes against that fundamental worldview. So the bad news is you're spending 7 weeks talking about fundamental worldviews. The good news is, if you really get these fundamental worldviews down, you're able to interact with almost anything. You can have a discussion on education, or a discussion on psychology, or a discussion on religious liberalism, or you name it, and you're able to know, here's what's at the root of it all, to carry it out. Just incidentally, I mentioned too that I used to see these commentators on the news and wonder how they did all that. Now I see all these commentaries on the news as I go through commentators, I'll get it right, on the news as I go through the news channels, and I think, wouldn't it be nice just to have somebody telling me the news instead of 4 people talking about it? And, just where can you go to just hear the news? That's all. I don't want your opinion and all these. I just want to hear the news. That is hard to find in the world today, and all that was free. Now, we come, and I know you may also be thinking, because sometimes I think the same myself, wait a minute, this is Sunday school, and in Sunday school we're supposed to have... But that's the word I was looking for, Bible study. That's right. And for the most part, I very much agree with that. When you come to Sunday school, it ought to be open your Bible, verse by verse. Let's take and pick apart and come to a strong understanding of the Word. And that is also, as you know, for the most part, what I do on Sunday morning and Sunday and Wednesday night and all that kind of stuff. And I do dislike the fact that so many churches don't have Sunday school anymore. And Sunday school is really a dying thing. They went to, first of all, small groups, and now they have, often it's called things like life groups, where they do life together. And they have, various activities or hobbies or things that are common among them. And no doubt they talk a little about the Bible, but typically it's in connection with, how do we apply this to our life? And I am convinced that you learn the Bible like you learn grammar. You learn it for its facts. And when you have those facts, the fundamentals of the Bible, then you're also able to make decisions about how you parent and how you grandparent and how you work in your business and all those kind of things. So I dislike the move away from Bible study and Sunday school. But all that said, here I'm giving myself a very long defense here for today's economics lesson. All that said, do you know the history of Sunday school? Has a rather interesting history, actually. That Sunday school was started in the late 1700s. That is to say, Jesus did not start Sunday school. Sunday school was started in the late 1700s. Prior to that time, and even for a long time after that, probably up until World War II, as I've mentioned before, a church was just you come to preaching, the preaching meeting. And yet in the late 1700s and into the 1800s, churches starting in England, a guy named Robert Raikes started Sunday school in England, and then it came pretty quickly into the United States. And in the United States, it grew very quickly in the 1800s to where most communities were having Sunday school. And I say communities because they were often community-based, not local church-based. They were actually started, why in the world would you call it Sunday school? Because on Sunday you went to school. They were actually started for children, and they were started really to educate children in things like reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was literally school. And the reason it was started for children is because those early days of the Industrial Revolution, as you may remember, many children were working in the factories, and they were working 10, 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and they didn't go to school. And it was Christians who said, this is not good. Children need to learn some things so that they can come out of this. By the way, just incidentally, some people have said, and it's hard to know the motivation of Robert Raikes because he died a long time ago, but some people have said Sunday school was actually started as an outgrowth of Marxism. That if you empower the workers, they will eventually rise up. And so it was started with that in mind. I don't really know if that was the motivation, because I think there's just a good humanitarian and Christian spirit that says little children ought to be able to read so that they can improve themselves. So whether it was started with a Marxist idea or it enabled some Marxism along the way, I don't know. But nonetheless, here is Sunday school. So literally, if you want to go back in history, then Sunday school was teaching things that were not related necessarily directly to the Bible, though they, of course, had a lot of Bible lessons and whatnot that was in it. And I might further add in this history lesson, before we get to John Maynard Keynes and learn another history lesson, I might add that Sunday schools were almost never started nor conducted by a local church. They were started and conducted by what was called Sunday school unions. And there was, the biggest one was the American Sunday School Union. And the American Sunday School Union was much like, for example, I guess the parachurch organization I always compare things to is the Gideons. And they were an outside of the church organization that you as a church member might say, I like this idea of Sunday school. I'm going to volunteer to work with the American Sunday School Union for a Sunday school for our town. And some of you remember in the olden days when we had quarterlies, remember those? And one of the options on the quarterly used to be the uniform Sunday school lesson. Remember those? And the uniform lesson had nothing to do with uniforms. It was put out by Sunday school leagues so that these unions all over the country would have the same lesson. So with the advent of public education, John Dewey and all that kind of stuff, Sunday schools pretty much ended up leaving. About the 1870s, public education was required in the United States. That meant all the kids were not working in the factories, they were going to school. That meant the church no longer needed to have a school teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic on Sundays, and so it became almost exclusively Bible teaching, and became that through the years until it died 15 years ago. Now, do you feel smarter now? Good. little church history. Now let's go to some economic history. And just a brief review again. We've looked at Darwin, changed the way we looked at origins. Marx changed the way we looked at value and necessity. Wellhausen changed the way we looked at scriptures. Freud changed the way we looked at ourselves. Last week we looked at John Dewey, who changed the way we looked at truth. It's not truth that matters, it's meaning, he says. And today we're going to look at John Maynard Keynes, who changed the way we look at economics. I'm going to give you just a little bit of economic history now, in a lesson that, of all the 7, this is the lesson that's going to be most, I'm not sure what word I want to use, most abstract from a Bible study. The rest we can pretty well tie in. This economics lesson is going to be a little bit different, but it does affect our view of the role of government. So this is the bottom line here, is what is government's role in the economy? There was pre-classical economics. This is before the father of modern economics. His name was Adam. I thought maybe one person would know. Smith. Adam Smith is the father of modern economics. He lived in the late 1700s. He started what today we call classical economics. Before that, a measure of wealth in feudal systems or mercantile systems, the measure of wealth was how much gold is in the king's treasury. And they didn't talk about GDP or anything like that. They talked about how much wealth is in the king's treasury. Adam Smith came along. He brought about a fundamental change in economics, which really created what today we would call capitalism. And Adam Smith said, no, wealth isn't really how much wealth is in the king's treasury, but rather wealth is the total annual income of all the citizens. So you make $10 and I make $10. And so if we're the whole country, then $20 is the wealth of the country. It was changed from the treasury to at one particular period of time so that you could compare. And really before Adam Smith, you didn't have such a thing as a recession or a depression or an expansion of growth because you didn't have much to compare to other than the king's treasury. Perhaps he doesn't have as much money this year as he did last year. But now we looked at how much are people making. And classical economics was pretty much leave well enough alone. The market will take care of itself. Then we came to the 1930s, and the market didn't seem to be taking care of itself, and a fellow named John Maynard Keynes came about and started what today is called Keynesian economics. And the world, with some tweaks, pretty much runs on Keynesian economics today. And this was not the measure of how much you earn, but more the measure of how many total dollars are spent by individuals or businesses or governments. Put all the spending together, and that's what today is called the gross national product or the gross domestic product or GDP, all those kind of things that we use to measure the economy. So anytime you hear GDP or GNP, you can know that's Keynesian. Prior to that, they never even considered how much was spent in terms of a measurement of economy. Now, let's get a little practical history. We've got 100 years ago. I guess a little more, 110 years ago, the first part of the 1900s was a period in which the United States and really much of the world was in this euphoria. Even Time magazine, they wrote an article, Time Life magazine wrote an article about describing the times, and it called it the beginning of the fabulous century. They could tell not by a crystal ball, just by the way everything was. It's like everything is looking wonderful. There's all these new inventions like vacuum cleaners and washing machines and sewing machines and farm implements and radios and automobiles, that this was a fabulous century. And that was really actually, believe it or not, the beginning of the end of classical economics. Now, it was so exciting, by the way, that Senator Albert Beveridge, you all know him, right? He was a senator for a few years from Indiana, and you should know him. Let me tell you why. Because it's Albert Beveridge's fault that New Mexico became a state in 1912. You know your New Mexico history, right? It would have been a state in 1907, except that Albert Beveridge blocked it in the Senate. New Mexico and Arizona both were considered 1907. Albert Beveridge blocked it. It didn't happen until he lost election in Indiana. And so in the 1912, it came back again, and we gained our statehood here in New Mexico. That's the New Mexico portion of the Albert Beveridge history. But what he says describes the view of the times. And tell me what you see here. In this quote, he says, God has marked the American people as his chosen nation to finally lead in the regeneration of the world. This is the divine mission of America, and it holds for us all the profit, all the glory, all the happiness possible to man. We are the trustees of the world's progress, guardians of its righteous peace. Here he spoke as a senator. And what kind of worldview or theologies do you see in that statement? He's a prophet, yes, he certainly is. The word prophet, yeah, the other kind of prophet. Yes, he was trying to give a little prophecy there also, but yeah, definitely it is a prophet motive that is at the bottom of it all, and he was the consummate capitalist, I suppose you could say. What kind of millennial view do you see? Pre, post, or all? This is a test on your millennialism. He would be a post-millennialist, as were most in that day, and that post-millennialism is the idea that you can build the kingdom, that you usher in the kingdom by your work, and so here it was, when you take that all the profit, all the glory, all the happiness possible to man. That is a utopian millennial view that is going to come out when Americans now at the brink of their fabulous century are going to be able to bring this into the world. There's one other thing you see when it says God has marked the American people as his chosen nation. If the United States is his chosen nation, then what nation in particular is not? Israel, that's right. So it's replacement theology as well. And that replacement theology went along with the Calvinism and the covenant theology that was so prevalent in that day. Also the postmillennialism was very strong in that day. So he really was speaking what everyone was saying in that day. Here, we're at the brink of this great civilization. Well, by the 1910s, you come, and the labor movement, which is sparked really by Marx's theology, the labor movement was very strong, even in the United States. In fact, most of us don't realize how close the United States was to becoming a socialist nation in the teens. And the 20s helped pull us back a little bit from that, and the 30s almost got us there. But it was outright politically spoken in the 1910s that socialism was the way to go, almost like Bernie Sanders. And probably since the 1910s until this past election, there wasn't any group in the United States that would openly speak we should be a socialist country. Now, there was a lot of socialism done, as we'll see in a moment, but they didn't just say it, as they did in the 1910s. And this was the time when all the revolt was taking place among the laborers and the workers. I give some figures there that in the first 6 months of 1916, there were 2,093 strikes or lockouts. The labor movement was tremendously powerful, tremendously strong, and the labor movement was fueled by Workers of the World Unite, which of course is the closing words of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. And so this was happening. Well, 1914, World War I came. The United States got involved a little bit later, went to 1918. So next year we'll have the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day, November the 11th of 1918. And that brought a change of thinking to a lot of the movements that were so strong in that day. The social Darwinists had said, we have progressed so far in history that nothing bad will ever happen again. We are on the brink of utopia. Well, World War I messed that up with the, I believe the figures are some 10 million people died in World War I. So it's hard to say we've evolved past all that when you got such a bloody conflict that takes place. Then the Marxists actually were strengthened by World War I for a couple of reasons. One is they used that as an example to show, look, capitalism isn't working. We're going to have a different economic program. And it was probably World War I that ushered in a lot of the socialism we see in Europe today. So many of the movements of today have roots 100 years ago. It takes a long time for these things to boil over. But, of course, in, I believe it was I may be wrong on my dates, 1917, although I want to say, is the year that Lenin took over from the Tsar in the revolution, the Russian Revolution, and Leninism, which was Marxism, which is communism, took root there. So World War I really was, if nothing else, we'll say fortuitous for the Marxists. And then the religious liberals were so open-minded that their brains fell out, and they were convinced after World War I, we've learned our lesson, we've made our last great mistake, they said. And we're on now to bigger and better things. So that was the world at the end of the teens. At the end of the 20s, in the 20s, of course, they're often called the what 20s? The roaring 20s. It was economic roar that was taking place in this huge expansion of the economy, unlike had ever been seen before, and maybe even since, with the unprecedented amount of investment by business. Business was making huge profits, and they were putting it all back into the business because they could make huger profits. It was almost in the 1920s the situation that is described in the scripture that speaks of the millennium, of course, and talks about how the plowman overtakes the reaper. You may remember that from the book of Isaiah. And, of course, it's an agricultural picture. And the reaper or the harvester is, of course, gathering the crops. And the plow, after you harvest, you plow. But the plowman is overtaking the reaper. The picture was you've got the plow right at the heels of your feet while you're reaping. And the reason is they don't want to miss a minute. Things are so productive that we want to get the next crop in as soon as we get the old crop out, and that was really the 1920s in terms of business. In the 1920s started something that has been very detrimental to many families today and in the last generation more than ever, but it started again in the 1920s, and that is, for the first time, on a wide scale anyway, an individual could buy an item on credit. First time they could make payments on it and get a washing machine for $7 down and $10 a month, whatever it might be. And this just opened up a great new world in one sense for the American consumer. So they were buying all these kind of things that they never had been able to buy before, not only because they didn't exist, but even when they did exist prior to that, you just couldn't go out and buy on credit, whereas now you could. And credit was seen as this is what the wise man does, is he borrows money. And there was even kind of the attitude if Mr. Smith owed a lot of money, had a lot of debt, it was not looked down upon in the 20s to say, oh, Mr. Smith's deep in debt. Rather, they said, Mr. Smith has a wonderful line of credit. That's kind of the same type thing you see with credit card issues today. Even how many ads did you see this week about the FICO score? And the blessing almost that's given to a great FICO score. Now, what do you need a FICO score for? to borrow money. So the goal is that you'd be able to borrow a whole bunch of money. And how do you get a good FICO score, by the way? You borrow money. If you don't borrow any money, if you're one of the 8 people in the world that has no line of credit, then you don't have a FICO score. Your FICO score is 0, and yet you may be the richest man in the world and not need any credit. But the bank will tell you this is bad. You know, you need, and in fact, this is what they tell our college students. I know because I've got one graduated a few years ago. And when graduation time comes, they are flooded with credit card offers. Fortunately, Nathan's address is my house, and so I just get them and throw them away. But you can imagine these kids get these, and they're thinking, you know, here I am, and I've got to move out and start a household and I don't have any money. I don't have a job. I don't have anything. So what do? On top of student loans, they borrow all this money. And that's what the world says to do. Well, of course, the people were even borrowing on the stock market, and because of that, every banker, everybody, anyone who is anybody on financial advice was saying the stock market is so good right now. Scrape everything you can and borrow everything you can and put as much as you can into the stock market. And you could buy a stock on 10% down. And pay out the rest on the profits that would come in later. Of course, that worked for some people until October 28th, 1929. And all of the value, so-called value of the stock market was built on cotton candy. And poof, it was gone. One day the stock market dropped 40%, which meant all of a sudden that you had to, the bank called you and said, hey, you don't have enough margin now, so you've got to fork over some cash. So some people went to the bank to get out their cash. A whole bunch of people went to the bank to get out their cash. Too many people at once went to the bank to get out their cash. Now the bank has to close down. They shut. Or other people didn't even have the cash because they had spent it on $10 a month on the washing machine and on the new radio and all this kind of stuff. And of course, it just turned into this disaster, as all of you know. Here comes the 1930s then, which brought about an economic recession, then depression that the United States and really the world had never known in recorded economic history. And the problem was that classical economics, Adam Smith, didn't have any answers for it. Because classical economics said, leave well enough alone. The French term is laissez-faire. Laissez-faire means what? Let it be. And that model said, here's what will happen. When the economy gets too heated up, then eventually it'll have a downturn. When it has a downturn, someone's going to get unemployed. As they, have lower wages, eventually the prices over here are going to fall because no one's buying them. And when the price goes down low enough, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to start buying, and it's going to turn. They're going to start buying because, hey, it's cheap. Let's buy some. That'll increase the factory output again because they're having to buy. And when the factory output is increased, they're going to hire this person over here. And so classical economics said it's going to always ebb and flow between a bad economy and a good economy and a bad economy and a good economy, and it'll go back and forth, and it'll never go too far. Well, here's what happened in the 1930s is all of a sudden, all this wealth dried up. So nobody buying the washing machine anymore. So Mr. Maytag has to lay off his employees. And he keeps dropping the price, trying to get somebody to buy. But guess what? Nobody has any money. There's still no, so he lays off more people. Now more people don't have any money, right? And then he says, there are so many people without money. There's no way I'm going to invest to fix this washing machine, fix-it machine, making machine. And so he does not invest. And it just kept rolling on top of each other to where there was to borrow Jimmy Carter's term, a malaise that had set over the economy. And nobody was going to invest anything, and it was going down, 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 down. And Adam Smith in classical economics had never envisioned a scenario in which nobody's going to hire again. And so out of this, here comes John Maynard Keynes. How's that for a long introduction to get to Keynes? Here comes John Maynard Keynes. And he was a mathematician, actually, but he tended to apply his mathematics to economics and make these mathematical models. And he became somewhat famous because he had been a benefit to the British government in terms of economics in India. And then, so being in that, he was invited to the 1919 Peace Conference. This is right after World War II. And the 1919 Peace Conference is the one that stated or set what the reparations of Germany was going to be for their sins of World War I. And if you know the rest of your history, it was that caused Germany into this unbelievable financial collapse with the Weimar Republic, and that eventually brought to the rise of Hitler. Well, by the 30s, it was obvious 1919 was not a good deal. And then they went back and they checked and said, John Maynard Keynes walked out of the 1919 deal because he said, there's absolutely no way Germany can ever repay this. We're setting up a disaster. And the only reason you guys are going for this is because you can go home and show a treaty, say you got it. It's all for political and profit reasons for yourself, and it's going to be disastrous. He walked out. Well, by 1930, he was a genius, because he had seen this ahead of time. And so people respected him. And on top of that, he actually understood the way currencies work with one another. I don't understand this at all, and most people don't. But he understood, hey, this is the way currency works. And so he was able to invest one currency against another, and in the 1930s became a multimillionaire. Now, let me say, first of all, that's very rare for an economist to actually be able to make some money in the economy. Most of them just have these theories. Well, he was a multimillionaire because of his own personal investments, and he understood the politics. Boy, here comes the hero of the day. And it was the hero of the day that basically caused so many of the problems that we have today. Here's the three simple foundations that Keynes brought in. And let me just say up front, I don't think his thinking was completely wrong. I think it's the application of his thinking that we have to be careful of. So what I would like to do is say, I'm not really anti-Keynesian, and that makes some of my conservative friends mad, because conservatives are supposed to be anti-Keynesian. I think he had some things that were actually correct, but there's two ways to apply them, and I think the application has been on the verge of disastrous for us anyway. So the three simple foundations. Number one is he believed an economy in depression could stay there. And he taught about that. So that was against everything Adam Smith is saying. And remember Herbert Hoover, the poor guy. He lived out classical economics. His 1933 campaign slogan was something like, we're about to turn the corner. I can't remember the exact words, but he believed this will kind of turn out of it. We're about to turn the corner. And in his 1928 slogan, you might remember, was about something in every pot. A chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. Because, that was pre-1929. Everything's wonderful, chicken in every pot, a car in every garage. And then it collapsed while he was president, so his next campaign slogan, we're about to turn the corner. Well, people didn't go for that. They would rather have a new deal. We want a new deal. And that's exactly what they got. And the New Deal was very Keynesian, and this is where the application of it comes. But The reason I said poor Herbert Hoover, because until George Herbert Walker Bush, Hoover lived longer than any other president after the presidency. He lived well into his 90s. All of that time, he died in the 60s, all of that time having to live with, you're the guy that brought the collapse. Wouldn't that be the nice thing to carry around? Here comes Keynes, who says, look, that depression you're in, it can last forever. It can just keep going down, down, down. Second thing he taught was that prosperity depended on investment. So that was different, because previously prosperity had been measured by income, and now he says no, prosperity is measured by spending, basically. How much is spent? So it was a flip side of the coin, but it was an important flip side. And then the third thing he said was that investment or spending is not assured. So you can imagine then the application of that is you better find a way to bring about some spending or investment. So this, as I've already mentioned, goes against this classical idea. And the one thing that probably changed in the 1930s that was the reason the economy didn't bounce back is because prior to that labor movement that started under Karl Marx, prior to that point, overall wages were notched down one at a time, or a little bit at a time. So if you all are my factory workers and I'm the factory owner and things aren't going so well, prior to that point, I would have sent out a memo, said, sorry, instead of $2 an hour, you're getting paid $1.75 an hour. And you all would have not been happy, but you'd have said, what can we do about it? And you'd have lived on $1.75 an hour. Now, what has happened with the Marxist idea of the labor movement is all the workers united. So all the workers said, you must pay us $2.25 an hour. And so the factory owner, when he can't do it, guess what he decides? Shut the doors. That means there's not a notch down, but rather all of you are out. There's no job. So all at once, you've got a huge labor pool without a job. And this was such a drastic move on the economy that now it didn't matter if they lowered their prices over here on the supply side. Nobody over here had money, or too big of a pool over here didn't have any money, so they could never swing it back up. So I honestly think we could probably blame the Great Depression on Karl Marx. This Workers of the World Unite brought about some of the problems that was there. Now, with all of that, Keynes did have the solution, and that is, he said, prosperity depends on investment, and investment can come from the individual or the business, but right now the individual doesn't have any money, the business doesn't have any money, and so he introduced the third party to it, and that was the government. Prior to the 1930s, a government only spent money that it had. Right? In fact, it really couldn't do much more, because government prior to the 1930s, money prior to the 1930s was based upon something. It was based upon gold, typically. So if the government over here didn't have, gold in the treasury, Fort Knox, then what did it do? By the way, that's all changed. It doesn't matter if there's no gold in Fort Knox now. So what happened is Keynes, who was big buddies with Roosevelt, they came up with ideas to free the nation from this handcuff of the gold standard in order that the government could now spend money. And the New Deal was the government's going to spend money and pour investment in. Now, as I said earlier, first of all, for those of you who come in late, not sorry, but we're in a series that's very un-Sunday school-like, very different in your economics class related to worldview. What we have here now is, again, this completely different way of looking at things that said the government needs to spend money that it doesn't have in order to boost the economy and to make it work. I also said towards the beginning, I'm not completely anti-Keynesian. I think that there are times and reasons for deficit spending. As a matter of fact, my hunch is, though we say, well, you got to have a balanced budget. My hunch is that every person in this room has lived at times without a balanced budget. And here's how you did it. You put a credit card down on the table without the, next month I'll pay for that, that kind of thing. That's not having a balanced budget. Individuals do it. You borrowed, you took a mortgage out. And so, you spent $100,000, but you didn't have $100,000. So that's not having a balanced budget. So we understand that there are times and uses. The problem is the application of it, of course. If you put out, if you bought $1 million house, and not having means to pay for it, that's a lot different than your $100,000 house and not having means to pay for it, right? So it's the responsible application of it. And businesses do it, states do it. Let me just get on the state of New Mexico for just a moment, which does have a balanced budget amendment. And so our governor right now is, I don't know, playing politics, I guess, with the higher education thing, saying they're going to close down June 28th or something like that. Well, all of us know they're not really going to close down. That's just her way of getting the legislatures back to do something, and mainly to do what she wants them to do. By the way, Shelley had a visit with the governor Tuesday night. They were on the same plane together, so Shelley just went up and spoke to her. But nonetheless, what's my point? We should know as discerning Christians there is more than one way to balance the budget. And I'm glad that the governor says, I don't want to raise taxes in order to balance the budget. And I'm glad because I personally don't want to raise, I don't want to do that. And that doesn't really overall increase spending. It just moves the spending that I could do to the spending that the government will do of the state of New Mexico. So I'm not all for that. But of our, I don't know, $70 million deficit or something like that, there is I think it's $15 billion rainy day fund sitting out there. So you can balance the budget in a number of ways. This is the only point I'm making is you carry this out. Now, here's the, to bring this down and try to land the plane. I think that the United States government can, like Keynes said, spend money to get the economy going again. And I think that sometimes it has to spend money to get the economy going again. So I'm not anti-deficit spending, actually. But here's the problem. How are they going to choose to spend that money? And here's what's happened. Beginning with Roosevelt, who introduced this, they decided to spend the money by making government bigger. And so beginning with Roosevelt, with all that alphabet soup he had, you remember, WPA and TVA and, all those CCC and, you name it, all these programs that were brought about, he did that to spur on the economy. And I'm going to say it was probably the right thing to do to get government spending, but what he created was the era of big government. And the era of dependence upon the government. Because now, if we have a need or a problem, we turn to the government and say, well, the government ought to fix this. The government ought to provide for this. To the point today, it is, well, the government owes us health care. And the government ought to pay for the health care. Now, I'm convinced that when the economy needs additional investment, what the government can and probably should do is enable individuals to spend that money. How do they do that? The government doesn't have to increase its spending at all in order to get more money out of the economy. It can do the opposite side and lower the taxes. Still going to be a deficit, isn't it? They're still spending the same way and not bringing in as much, so that's deficit spending. But when they just lower the taxes and don't raise the spending, what does that do? That enables the people to decide how to spend, right? And so the people do that. I remember back in the, I guess it was right after 2008, I guess, with the collapse that took place there. And some of you probably recall as well, although it's been a few years, so you may have forgotten, that George W. Bush gave a tax rebate to every, I assume every citizen, but it might have been everyone with kids. I remember I had 2 kids. Was it everybody? Everybody. So I remember, I think we got $800 or something like that in a tax rebate. Cash, here it is, go spend it. And no strings attached. How you spend it, it's just you got 4 kids, 4 people in your household, and so this is how much you get. And that was to spur on the economy. It was an incentive to spur on the economy. Now, I would much rather see that than we're going to provide $800 worth of services, $800, all this kind of stuff. And this is where I think conservative Christians should come in. Is not so much is Keynes right or is Keynes wrong, but how is Keynes applied to the world today? And does it create bigger government? That is the big question. Now, that is probably the first time in all your 250 years of living that you have had an economic lesson in Sunday school, right? And probably the last time too, because here not next week, because next week's Easter. So for our Easter services, we're just having one joint service at 10 a.m. But the week after that, we're going to do Soren Kierkegaard, and then with that, you'll have all the 7 building blocks you need to a biblical worldview. And I hope that all of it is helpful to you. Well, let me lead us in prayer, and we'll take a little break and then come back for worship.